Legendary creatures seem like they're about to be getting a huge redesign. So about a month or so ago, the new stat block for the Ancient Green Dragon was leaked or revealed. I say leaked because it wasn't put online in any official capacity, but it was shown off during Gen Con, so we know that it is legit. Anyway, I've barely seen anyone talking about it, and the subject came up in my Discord server last week, which check it out, the link is in the description if you haven't already. But the thing is, this redesign of the Ancient Green Dragon gives us some major insights into the overall design direction that the team may be taking with the upcoming monster manual, and I wanted to talk about it. Because if you've spent any time on this channel, you probably know how much I love discussing monster design, and seeing as the monster manual isn't coming out for another 4 months, well, I couldn't wait. So let's explore the new Ancient Green Dragon and see what secrets it might hold about future monsters. And to be clear, this video is not intended to be an evaluation of the Green Dragon itself, so much as it is a discussion about potential new trends in monster design. Firstly, I want to mention just how important the updated and new monsters are to the game overall. The relative power and strength of our characters, as far as combat is concerned at least, can only be measured against the monsters that we're fighting. Most creators, myself included, have been talking a lot about how it seems that the average power level has increased with the 2024 Player's Handbook. And make no mistake, generally speaking at least, that seems to be true, at least as far as raw numbers go. So while in a vacuum, the 2024 characters might seem stronger, the question that we still don't have an answer to, and won't probably until February of 2025, is how strong our characters are in relation to the things that they will actually be fighting. This is the much more important part of the question, and the one that we just don't have an answer to yet. So what we're learning about the Ancient Green Dragon will highlight some of the design trends, but again, it's still far from representative of what an average encounter is going to look like. Alright, let's finally get into it. I apologize for the quality of the image, I know that it's not great, but it's the best we've got. So this is what the new Ancient Green Dragon stat block looks like. If you aren't familiar with the new layout of stat blocks for 2024, I did make an entire video doing a deep dive on it. I'll leave that linked in the end cards if you're curious, because we aren't going to be touching on the details during this one. Let's compare it to the 2014 Ancient Green Dragon. There's a couple of things that we notice right away. First is that the new dragon has slightly more hit points, sitting at 402 instead of 385. That's roughly a 5% gain. It's not a lot, but admittedly, it's not nothing either. The next big thing that stands out to me is the initiative score. This is sitting at +8 or 23 if you're using passive initiative. Let's talk about the +8 first. So this is a massive jump from the 2014 version, which had an initiative score of +1, given that its dexterity was only sitting at 12. But looking at the 2024 dragon, we see that its dexterity is also 12, so what gives? Where does this +8 initiative score come from? The only thing that I've been able to piece together is that they must be adding its proficiency bonus to the score. The dragon's proficiency is +7 and its dex mod is a +1, so here we arrive at +8. This looks like something that we haven't seen before, but is worth mentioning that there is an equivalent on the player side. The alert feat, which has the ability initiative proficiency, which allows the character to add their proficiency bonus to their initiative roll. What's weird though is that it isn't explained anywhere, or at least not anywhere that we can see here just on this stat block. It's entirely possible that perhaps every monster, maybe above a certain threshold, may get to add their proficiency bonus to their initiative rolls. For the moment, it's unclear as we don't have the monster manual yet, but this on its own makes the dragon a substantially greater threat, as getting to go earlier is pretty much always going to be a good thing. As for the static 23, this is the passive initiative method for DMs that don't want to roll initiative and instead just want to use these values. While no method for determining passive initiative is provided in the block itself or in the 2024 Player's Handbook, I think it's fair to extrapolate from the passive perception calculation, which is provided in the new rules glossary. We would just swap wisdom score here for dexterity, add the +5 because we know that due to its battle ready trait, it has advantage on initiative, and then we add our proficiency bonus. Altogether, that gives us 10 +1 +5 +7, which is 23. Otherwise, there's not too much else going on in this section. The most noteworthy thing is that its charisma score has been bumped from a 19 to a 22, or +4 to +6, which is quite a big jump, and extremely relevant since charisma is the dragon's spellcasting ability modifier. This sets its spell save DC to 21 rather than the 19 that it would have been, which is a big difference. But we'll get to spellcasting in a little bit. Next up is the trait section. It's still got the amphibious trait, and it now has battle ready, granting it advantage on initiative as we already discussed. But most notably here, it has more legendary resistances, starting with a minimum of 4 per day or 5 when it's in its lair, and we'll talk about lairs a little bit later on too. But it's worth noting that legendary resistances still function exactly the same as they used to, which is at least somewhat surprising to me. There had been a lot of discussion within the community about the general feeling of dislike towards legendary resistance and it feeling like too much of a no button. And I get the sentiment, but I also feel as though it makes a lot of sense for certain very powerful creatures to have those kinds of capabilities. Though that being said, I wouldn't have been opposed to seeing some kind of a redesign here, or at the very least, maybe tying it to an ability score or something of that nature. Moving on to the action section, this is where we really see the stat blocks start to diverge significantly. The 2014 Ancient Green Dragon had a bite attack, a claw attack, a tail attack, frightful presence, and a breath weapon. The 2024 Dragon, it's got a rend attack, spellcasting, and breath weapon. So bite, claw, and tail attacks are just gone? Replacing it with rend kind of makes sense since that essentially is to tear or shred, which is effectively what bite and claw attacks would have done anyway. I won't say that it's a perfect fit, but it honestly feels like a reasonable catch-all to reduce the varied types and effectiveness of attacks and simplicity of rolling damage. In 2014, you would need d6s, d8s, d10s to roll damage for all of these hits. Now you just cut out the d8s, which not only is one less die, but it also means that you don't necessarily need to remember all the different combinations of dice that were meant to be rolled together. Admittedly, yes, it's a small thing, but I can say as someone who spent the last few years running high-level D&D with crazy amounts of dice active at any given time, I'll take even a little bit of added simplicity here. The other thing that this does though is it ensures that elemental damage is present across every single attack, whereas before, it was just on the bite, of which there was only one per turn. I'm a very big fan of seeing various damage types more thoroughly embedded within the block. And if anyone's curious, the 2024 version does actually have a slightly higher average DPR, sitting at 81 versus 73 of the 2014 version. Importantly though, the dragon has been given the ability to swap just one of its rend attacks to instead opt to use spellcasting. This is a trend that we have seen become much more common in the later books, as early on, closer to 2014, to use spellcasting, a creature would have to sacrifice all of their other attacks. This is a nice addition and allows the creatures to hit much harder than they would have otherwise and set up some very powerful combos for themselves. Carrying on from that, the next big change here is spellcasting. Notably, the 2014 Ancient Green Dragon did not have spellcasting available to it. Yes, the monster manual did include variant rules for creating spellcasting dragons, but they were significantly more limited in what we're seeing here. In later books like Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, we do see some spellcasting dragons, namely the gem dragons, but even those still function differently than what we have here, and there weren't all that many of them to begin with. Anyway, as far as spellcasting goes, we still see the convention that was established with the Wild Beyond the Witchlight, in that there are at-will spells and X times per day spells. But one notable change is that rather than being cast at their lowest level as would be typical, many of these spells actually specify that they are being upcast. Charm Monster is cast at 5th level, Dissonant Whispers at 4th level, and Cloudkill is cast at 8th level. We've seen some minor adjustments made to spells within this format before, but it was usually relegated to changing the casting time to an action or to restricting targets or something of that nature. I think this may be the first time that we're seeing upcasts here, but it's also entirely possible that I am completely wrong, but I'm sure someone will let me know if that's the case. Now we're able to cast 8th level spells, whereas the old guidance would have prevented anything above 7th level based on its CR of 21. Something else that should be mentioned in regard to spellcasting in this manner is the interaction it has with the new version of Counterspell. As a quick reminder, Counterspell now requires a target to make a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, the action, bonus action, or reaction used to cast the spell is wasted, but if it was cast with a spell slot, the spell slot is not wasted. Now, uses per day are not spell slots. As a result, a successful counterspell would in fact burn one of these uses. So if the dragon in this case tried to cast Polymorph and was successfully counterspelled, they can't attempt Polymorph again. Granted, for the at-will spells there would be no impact here, but seeing as the per day ones tend to be a little bit more powerful, this is absolutely something worth keeping in mind. Moving on from spellcasting, the Poison Spray breath weapon, while functionally identical to the 2014 version, the formatting of it has changed and now it barely takes 3 lines rather than the 5 from before. They've redesigned it to be read as the mechanics of the ability, what happens on a failure, and then what happens on a success. I think this is done well. It cuts out the natural language element, which I do admittedly kind of like, but at least it retains all of the information that you would need to easily use this effect without feeling like you need to cross-reference the monster manual. I think I like this change in formatting, and we also saw some of it happening in the player's handbook with the beasts. Next, we have what is probably the most significant change here, and probably why you clicked on this video. There are no more legendary actions. For real. At least as far as we can tell from this stat block, which is a good representation of a typical legendary creature. So, legendary actions are gone and have instead been replaced with a host of reactions. Now, it does get to break the conventional rule of 1 reaction per round, but this isn't the first creature we've seen do this, but it is far from common amongst 2014 enemies. Here we see the dragon gets 3 reactions per round, or 4 if it's in its lair. Each reaction has a specific trigger and a response. Charming Presence allows the dragon, whenever a creature the dragon can see ends its turn, to be able to cast Charm Monster at 5th level. So I know I said this video wasn't about this block specifically, but as an aside, this effect is actually kind of insane. Given that they can swap an attack with a use of spellcasting to cast Charm Monster, and then can do so almost immediately after when another creature can see ends its turn, is wild. Remember, it's casting this at 5th level. That's potential for 4 characters to become charmed, which can easily let the dragon escape or just get a mostly free round. This is way more powerful than it appears at first glance, even if the characters are getting advantage on the save because you're attacking them. And also, yes, the term creature does include player characters, as highlighted in the rules glossary. Corrosive Miasma allows the dragon to hurl out a poison sphere when they either take damage or use their legendary resistance. What's so powerful about this is that not only does it lower the affected creature's AC, but it allows the dragon to interrupt the turn of the player who is going. That shouldn't be understated. The character could die or take significant damage to the point that it changes their course of action or those of subsequent players, and it all happens in the middle of their turn. That's very cool, and to me is probably the biggest upside of swapping out legendary actions for reactions, but let's talk a little bit more about that. Firstly, I should mention that this isn't the first time that we've seen legendary creatures without legendary actions. Since Glory of the Giants and even Planescape, we have seen it happen a few times, but it was still largely up in the air if it was going to be the case for the new Monster Manual, but it appears that it is. So why does any of this matter? Why is it significant that legendary actions have been removed in favor of reactions? Legendary actions were incredibly important for high-level and powerful creatures, allowing these enemies the opportunity to interact with the players when off-turn creates a lot more dynamics during an encounter and allows for battles against a solo enemy to almost feel like there were more creatures by virtue of it being able to essentially break the rules of action economy. So why the switch then? What's the difference? This is probably a bit more of a nuanced question. Legendary actions, design-wise, filled a slightly different hole than reactions do. Legendary actions can often be unrelated to the action at hand and can sometimes feel disconnected. It's just something else that the creature can do, so it does it. But there was no requirement of it being any form of a response. This is not the case with the reaction model. These reactions all have specific triggers and responses based on the action at hand. What this does is enable the combat to feel a lot more smooth and almost cinematic in nature. I touched on this earlier, but the fact that it can interrupt a turn to hurl a poison sphere or make a rend attack is a very big deal. Also, there's the mechanical element of just tracking it. There doesn't seem to be any 2 or 3 cost reactions, everything just costs 1. This makes them feel easier to use during play, but also always allows the DM to use the one that feels the most appropriate in a specific scenario. So what are people worried about then? I should probably address a very common misconception that I've seen countless times regarding legendary actions, and that's that they are somehow uninteractable, in the sense that there's no way to deprive the creature of them. This is not the case though. The 2014 Monster Manual is very explicit about the fact that legendary actions cannot be used while the creature is incapacitated or otherwise unable to take actions. So will it be too easy to deprive a legendary creature of their reactions? Maybe? But like I said, there wasn't any shortage of ways to incapacitate or stun or otherwise deprive a creature of its action in 2014, So this isn't all that different. And even in recognition of this concern, we have seen the design team make a few small adjustments to effects that very easily deprived a creature of their entire reaction, and instead refine them into taking away only opportunity attacks. Two examples of this are Shocking Grasp and the Open Hand Monk's Open Hand Technique feature, where Addle now only removes the ability to make an opportunity attack. I'm sure there's even some more examples of this, but these were the first two that came to mind, and I'm sure that it will continue to be the trend moving forward. When I stop to think about it, I'm not sure that we're losing all that much by moving away from legendary actions and converting the effect into reactions, other than a DM needing to know a rule that randomly appears only in the monster manual. Sure, some spells like Slow, for example, might be a little more punishing, or Tasha's Mind Whip if you're using it, but again, other common spells like Tasha's Hideous Laughter or Sleep or Hypnotic Pattern would have accomplished the same thing in 2014, so I'm not sure that this truly is all that worse. And we have to remember that at least the Ancient Green Dragon here has been given some extra legendary resistances to potentially offset some of the fact that there might be other ways of removing their reaction. On the other hand though, what it does enable is combat to feel a bit more fluid and interactive. Knowing that what you do can have some very precise repercussions feels more natural and visceral to me, and I think I like it. In full transparency though, I haven't played with this version of the Green Dragon yet. One final thing that I do want to touch on are lair actions. These may or may not be gone. They didn't make an appearance in the actual stat block itself in 2014, so it's hard to draw any conclusions from their absence here. What is interesting is that they do make specific notes in the block that if the creature is in its lair, it gets an extra reaction per round and an extra legendary resistance. I do hope that this is in addition to lair actions, but I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. So that's the new high-level stat block. I think we've learned a lot about the design direction for high-level creatures and maybe some others too. The blocks seem more concise, but they also hit harder. They seem to encourage more fluid combat with stronger spells and some redesigned mechanics. This has got me even more excited for the new monster manual than I already was. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and check out some of my other D&D videos, but otherwise, take care.